The rain fell on Blackstone Harbor like a funeral shroud, heavy and relentless, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of black water that reflected the dim glow of street lamps. It was the kind of night when honest men stayed indoors and prayed, while those who had long abandoned prayer moved through the shadows with purpose. In a city built on secrets and blood, the rain was a blessing. It washed away evidence. It muffled screams. It made disappearances easier to explain. Marcello Ferrante stood outside the back entrance of La Fontana restaurant, his thin jacket soaked through to his skin, water dripping from his dark hair into his eyes. He had been standing there for 47 minutes, waiting for permission to enter. Through the frosted glass of the door, he could see the warm golden light of the private dining room, hear the muffled laughter of men who had never known what it meant to wait in the rain. Men who had never known hunger. Men who believed their power was real. He was 38 years old, though the lines around his eyes and the grey at his temples made him appear older. His face was unremarkable, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, that witnesses could never quite remember, that security cameras seemed to overlook. This was not an accident. Marcello Ferrante had spent 2 decades cultivating invisibility, in a world where powerful men announced themselves with gold watches and expensive suits and armed entourages. He had chosen a different path. He had chosen to become a ghost. The door finally opened, and Enzo Moretti's thick frame filled the doorway. Enzo was the capo of the Conti family's street operations, a man whose reputation for cruelty was exceeded only by his reputation for stupidity. He was 43 years old, with the bloated face of a man who had never denied himself any pleasure, and the small, mean eyes of someone who enjoyed causing pain. He wore a silk shirt that strained against his belly and 3 gold rings on his right hand that he used to mark the faces of men who displeased him. Enzo looked at Marcello the way a man looks at something unpleasant on the bottom of his shoe. He smiled, revealing teeth stained by decades of cigars and red wine. "So the dog finally comes when called," Enzo said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who has never questioned his place in the hierarchy. "You are late, Marcello. The Don does not like to be kept waiting." Marcello lowered his eyes in the posture of submission he had perfected over many years. "I apologize, Enzo. The traffic from the warehouse was very bad because of the rain." Enzo stepped forward and grabbed Marcello by the collar of his wet jacket, pulling him close enough that Marcello could smell the garlic and wine on his breath. "Did I ask for excuses? Did I ask you to explain yourself like a woman? The Don summoned you an hour ago. You should have crawled here on your hands and knees if necessary." "You are right," Marcello said quietly. "It will not happen again." Enzo released him with a shove that sent Marcello stumbling backward into a puddle. The capo laughed, a wet, ugly sound that echoed in the alley. "Look at you. 15 years in this family, and you are still nothing. Still a runner. Still an errand boy. Do you know what we call you behind your back? We call you the mouse. Because you are small and quiet and completely useless, except for carrying messages." Marcello said nothing. He straightened his jacket and waited. "Go inside," Enzo commanded, jerking his thumb toward the door. "Dry yourself off before you enter the dining room. You will not drip water on the Don's floor like a stray dog, and when you enter you will kneel and apologize for your tardiness. Do you understand?" "I understand," Marcello said. He walked past Enzo into the warm interior of the restaurant, feeling the capo's contemptuous gaze on his back. The kitchen staff barely glanced at him as he passed through their domain, weaving between prep stations and ovens toward the small bathroom near the storage room. They knew who he was. They knew what he was. Another faceless soldier in the Conti family, barely worth acknowledging. Marcello closed the bathroom door behind him and stood before the cracked mirror above the sink. Water dripped from his face, and he watched it fall, counting the drops. 47 minutes in the rain, Enzo's hand on his collar, the word mouse spoken with such contempt. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small burner phone, one of 17 he currently maintained, each connected to a different network of contacts, each representing a different facet of his true existence. This particular phone was connected to a man named Judge Harrison Wells, who sat on the federal bench, and who owed Marcello 3 favors for making certain photographs disappear 7 years ago. Marcello typed a short message. "Approve the Hendricks warrant tomorrow." Make sure the FBI receives the evidence package by noon. He deleted the message after sending it, then removed the battery and the SIM card, which he would destroy later. The Hendricks warrant had nothing to do with the Conti family. It was connected to a rival organization in the southern part of the city, a group that had been interfering with shipping routes that Marcello needed to remain open. By this time next week, their leadership would be in federal custody and the routes would be clear again. This was what the Conti family did not understand. This was what Enzo Moretti, with his gold rings and his small mind, could never comprehend. The true power in Blackstone Harbor did not rest with men who announced their strength through violence and intimidation. It rested with the man who controlled information, the man who knew every secret. The man who could make a phone call and rearrange the entire architecture of the criminal underworld without ever raising his voice or lifting his hand. It rested with the fixer. Marcello Ferrante had been the fixer for 19 years. He had built his network slowly, patiently, with the careful precision of a master craftsman. He had started as a young man with nothing, an orphan from the old neighborhood who had been recruited into the Conti family as a runner because he was fast and quiet and forgettable. But even then, he had understood something that the men around him did not. He had understood that in a world of wolves, the most dangerous creature was not the one with the sharpest teeth. It was the one who knew where all the wolves slept. He had collected secrets the way other men collected weapons. He had learned which politicians could be bought and which could only be threatened. He had discovered which judges had mistresses and which had gambling debts and which had children with problems that required discreet solutions. He had mapped the invisible connections between organized crime and legitimate business, between the police department and the families it was supposed to investigate, between the newspapers and the men who decided what stories would never be printed. And he had done all of this while remaining invisible, while being humiliated by men like Enzo Moretti, while being dismissed as the mouse, the errand boy, the faceless soldier who would never amount to anything. This was his armor. This was his greatest weapon. In a world where powerful men were constantly targeted by rivals and law enforcement, Marcello Ferrante had achieved something remarkable. He had become so insignificant that no one thought to investigate him. No one thought to follow him. No one thought to wonder how a simple soldier could afford 3 apartments in different parts of the city, or how he knew things that only the most connected men in Blackstone Harbor should know. He dried his face with paper towels and looked at his reflection one final time. The face that stared back at him was the face of a servant, the face of a man who had accepted his place at the bottom of the hierarchy, but behind those dark, quiet eyes, something else waited, something patient, something that had been waiting for a very long time. He left the bathroom and walked toward the private dining room where Don Salvatore Conti held court. The dining room of La Fontana was a cathedral of old money and older traditions. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across tables draped in white linen. The walls were covered in dark wood paneling imported from Sicily 3 generations ago, and oil paintings of saints and Madonnas watched over the proceedings with sorrowful eyes. It was a room designed to remind everyone who entered of the weight of history, of the blood that had been spilled to create the empire that now controlled half the criminal enterprise in Blackstone Harbor. At the center of the longest table sat Don Salvatore Conti. The Don was 63 years old, a man whose power had made him soft in body but hard in spirit. He had the face of a Roman senator, proud and cruel, with deep-set eyes that missed nothing and thin lips that rarely smiled. His silver hair was combed back from his forehead, and his hands, which rested on the white tablecloth like sleeping predators, were adorned with rings that had belonged to his father and grandfather before him. He wore a suit that had cost more than most men earned in a year, and he sat with the absolute stillness of someone who had never needed to hurry in his life. Around him sat his inner circle. Enzo Moretti had taken his place at the Don's right hand, his position as chief capo giving him proximity to power. Beside Enzo sat Tommaso Benedetti, the family's consigliere, an elderly man with white hair and spectacles who had served 3 generations of Conti leadership and who knew more secrets than any living person in the organization, except, of course, for Marcello himself. Further down the table sat various captains and lieutenants, Men who controlled different aspects of the family business, from gambling to narcotics to protection rackets. And at the far end of the table, as far from her father as the seating arrangement would allow, sat Giuliana Conti. The Don's daughter was 29 years old, beautiful in the cold, distant way of women who have been raised in gilded cages. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, revealing high cheekbones and eyes the color of bitter chocolate. She wore a black dress that covered her from neck to wrist, and a single strand of pearls that had belonged to her mother, who had died under circumstances that were never discussed. Giuliana rarely spoke at these gatherings. She watched, she listened, and she judged everyone around her with a contempt she barely bothered to hide. Marcello entered the room and felt every eye turned toward him. He walked to the center of the floor, stopped at the appropriate distance from the Don's table, and lowered himself to one knee. He bowed his head and waited. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. This was part of the ritual, part of the humiliation. Making a man kneel and wait reminded him of his place. It reminded everyone watching of the distance between power and servitude. Finally, Don Salvatore spoke. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it more terrifying than any shout could have been. "Marcello, you were summoned 1 hour ago. Explain your tardiness." Marcello kept his head bowed. "I have no excuse, Don Conti. The fault is mine entirely. I accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate." The Don made a sound that might have been amusement. He looked at Enzo. "You see, this is what I appreciate about Marcello. He does not make excuses. He does not blame others. He accepts responsibility. It is a rare quality these days." Enzo shifted in his seat, clearly disappointed that his victim was not being punished more severely. "With respect, Don Conti, discipline must be maintained. If we allow tardiness to go unpunished, others will think they can do the same." Don Salvatore considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are right, of course. Discipline is the foundation of our family. Marcello, you will forfeit your share of this month's earnings from the warehouse operations. Additionally, you will serve as personal attendant to my guests at the feast tomorrow night. You will pour wine, clear plates, and attend to whatever needs arise. Is this understood?" "Yes, Don Conti. Thank you for your mercy." "Rise," the Don commanded. Marcello stood, keeping his eyes lowered. "Now," Don Salvatore continued, "let us discuss why I summoned you. There is a matter that requires discretion, a message that must be delivered to a certain individual, and delivered in such a way that it cannot be traced back to this family. You have proven yourself capable of such tasks in the past." "I am honored to serve," Marcello said. The Don gestured to Tommaso, who produced a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket. The consigliere's ancient hands trembled slightly as he extended the envelope toward Marcello. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Marcello saw something in the old man's gaze that surprised him. It was fear. Not fear of Marcello, but fear of what the envelope contained, fear of what was being set in motion. Marcello took the envelope without looking at it. The recipient. Don Salvatore smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You will deliver this to Vincent Calabrese. You know him?" Marcello's face remained impassive, though his mind was already racing. Vincent Calabrese was the underboss of the Moreno family, the Conti family's primary rival in Blackstone Harbor. The two organizations had maintained an uneasy truce for nearly a decade, dividing the city's criminal enterprises according to agreements negotiated in blood and sealed with mutual threats. For Don Salvatore to send a message directly to Calabrese, bypassing the usual diplomatic channels, meant that something significant was about to change. "I know of him," Marcello said carefully. "We have never met personally." "Good. That is why I am sending you. No one in the Moreno organization knows your face. No one will connect you to this family. You will deliver the envelope to Calabrese personally, wait for his response, and return to me with whatever message he wishes to send. You will speak to no one else. You will leave no trace of your presence. Is this clear?" "Perfectly clear, Don Conti." The Don leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes studying Marcello with an intensity that would have made lesser men tremble. "You have served this family faithfully for many years, Marcello. You have never disappointed me. Do not let this be the first time." Marcello bowed his head once more. "I will not fail you, Don Conti." He was dismissed with a wave of the Don's hand, and he turned to leave the dining room. As he walked toward the door, he passed Juliana Conti's chair. She did not look at him. She never looked at him. To her, he was furniture, part of the background, something that existed only to serve and then disappear. But as he passed, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful, Mouse. The wolves are hungry tonight." Marcello did not respond. He did not acknowledge that she had spoken at all. But as he stepped out into the cold rain once more, her words echoed in his mind. "The wolves are hungry tonight." She did not know how right she was. He walked through the rain for 6 blocks before he allowed himself to open the envelope. He stood in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse, water streaming down his face, and read the message that Don Salvatore Conti was sending to his rival. The message was simple. It was a declaration of war. The Don was informing Vincent Calabrese that the truce was over, that the Conti family would be expanding into Moreno territory, that any resistance would be met with overwhelming force, and that Calabrese himself had exactly 72 hours to leave Blackstone Harbor forever or face the consequences. Marcello read the message 3 times, memorizing every word, then burned it with a lighter he carried for exactly such purposes. He watched the paper curl and blacken, the ashes washing away in the rain. This was madness. The Conti family was strong, but the Moreno organization had allies throughout the eastern seaboard. A war between them would tear Blackstone Harbor apart. It would bring unwanted attention from federal authorities. It would destabilize the entire network of arrangements and agreements that Marcello had spent 2 decades building. Don Salvatore did not know this. Don Salvatore did not understand the delicate balance that kept the city's criminal ecosystem functioning. He saw only his own ambition, his own desire for expansion, his own belief that strength could overcome strategy. This was the problem with men like Don Salvatore Conti. They believed their power was absolute. They believed that because they commanded armies of soldiers and controlled territories and inspired fear, they controlled their own destinies. They did not understand that real power was invisible, that real control came from knowing which threads to pull and which to leave alone. Marcello had protected the Conti family for years, not out of loyalty, but out of convenience. The family served as useful cover for his own operations. The Don's obsession with visible power left the invisible corridors of influence open for Marcello to exploit. It was an arrangement that had benefited everyone. But now Don Salvatore was threatening to destroy everything. A war with the Moreno family would expose Marcello's network to scrutiny. It would disrupt the careful balance he had maintained. It would force him to choose sides in a conflict he had no desire to join. He would have to do something about this. He would have to find a way to prevent the war while maintaining his invisibility. It would require careful planning, precise manipulation, and above all, patience. But first, he had a message to deliver. Vincent Calabrese's headquarters was located in a converted textile factory on the north side of the city, a fortress of brick and iron that had been in the Moreno family's possession for 3 generations. Marcello had never entered the building, but he knew its layout intimately. He knew the location of every security camera, every guard post, every hidden entrance. He knew the schedules of the men who patrolled its perimeter and the names of the men who controlled access to its inner sanctums. This was another aspect of being the fixer. Marcello knew everything about everyone. He had spent years building a network of informants that penetrated every organization in Blackstone Harbor, from the largest crime families to the smallest street gangs to the police department itself. Information flowed to him like water flowing downhill, and he collected it all, filed it away, waited for the moment when it would become useful. He approached the factory from the east, through a network of alleys that the Moreno security teams rarely patrolled, because they were too narrow for vehicles and too exposed to sniper positions from the surrounding buildings. He moved like a shadow, his wet clothes making no sound, his footsteps falling in the spaces between raindrops. The guard at the Eastern Service entrance was named Tommy Russo. He was 24 years old, had been with the Moreno organization for 3 years, and had a gambling problem that had put him $40,000 in debt to bookmakers who reported to Marcello. He was also sleeping with the wife of a Moreno captain, a dangerous affair that would end with his death if it were ever discovered. Marcello stepped out of the shadows and allowed himself to be seen. Tommy's hand went to his weapon, then froze when he recognized the face. What are you doing here?" "I have a message for Vincent Calabresi," Marcello said calmly. "From Don Salvatore Conti." Tommy's eyes widened. "You cannot just walk in here. You have to go through channels. You have to arrange a meeting through the proper contacts." "The message cannot wait," Marcello said. He held up the sealed envelope, though of course it was a new envelope, containing a new copy of the message he had memorized and recreated. Don Salvatore was very specific. "I am to deliver this personally to Calabresi and wait for his response." Tommy hesitated, caught between his duty to protect the entrance and his fear of interfering with matters above his station. Finally, he reached for his radio. "Wait here, I will call it in." 5 minutes later, Marcello was being escorted through the factory's maze of corridors by 2 armed men who regarded him with open suspicion. They searched him twice, took his phone and his wallet, and made him walk through a metal detector, before allowing him to approach the door to Calabresi's private office. The underboss of the Moreno family was waiting for him. Vincent Calabresi was 51 years old, a man whose reputation for calculated violence was matched only by his reputation for strategic brilliance. Unlike Don Salvatore, who relied on intimidation and tradition, Calabresi had built his power through careful planning and ruthless efficiency. He was thin, almost gaunt, with the hollow cheeks and intense eyes of an ascetic. His grey suit was perfectly tailored, and his silver hair was cut short in a military style that reflected his years of service before entering the family business. He sat behind a desk that held nothing but a single lamp, a telephone, and a glass of water. The room was sparse, functional, utterly devoid of the ostentation that characterized Don Salvatore's surroundings. This was a man who valued results over appearances. "You are Marcello Ferrante," Calabresi said. His voice was quiet, measured, each word chosen with precision. "You work for the Conti family. A soldier, I believe." Nothing more. Marcello nodded, offering no correction. Calabresi's eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "And yet Don Salvatore sends you to deliver a message to me personally. Why? Why send a common soldier when he has captains and lieutenants at his disposal?" "I do not question the Don's decisions," Marcello said. "I only follow orders." "A wise policy," Calabresi said, though his tone suggested he did not entirely believe this answer. "Very well. Give me the message." Marcello handed over the envelope and watched as Calabresi opened it with a silver letter opener. The underboss read the contents slowly, his face betraying no emotion. When he finished, he set the letter down on his desk and was silent for a long moment. "Your Don," Calabresi said finally, "is either very brave or very foolish. I suspect the latter. He believes that because he has more soldiers than I do, he can dictate terms. He does not understand that this city's balance of power is far more complex than he imagines." Marcello said nothing. He was not expected to respond. "Tell Don Salvatore this," Calabresi continued. "Tell him that I have received his message and that I will respond in due time. Tell him that I do not make decisions in haste, and that he would be wise to do the same. Tell him that war is expensive, and that the costs often fall on those who least expect to pay them." "I will deliver your message exactly as you have spoken it," Marcello said. Calabresi nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He looked directly into Marcello's eyes and held his gaze for several seconds. It was the look of a man who was searching for something, trying to see beneath the surface. "You're an interesting man, Marcello Ferrante," he said quietly. "You stand here in the heart of your enemy's territory, delivering a declaration of war, and you show no fear. Most men in your position would be trembling. You are perfectly calm. Why is that?" Marcello allowed himself a small shrug. "I am a messenger. I have no stake in the quarrels of great men. I deliver words and return with answers. There is nothing in that to fear." Calabresi smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you are something more than you appear. Either way, you may go. Tell your Don that he will have my answer within 48 hours, and tell him to enjoy the time he has left." One way or another, this matter will be resolved. Marcello bowed slightly and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Calabrese spoke once more. One more thing, Marcello. Tell Don Salvatore that I know about the warehouse in the South District, the one he thinks is secret. Tell him that his secrets are not as secure as he believes. Marcello filed this information away and left without responding. He walked back through the corridors of the factory, collected his belongings from the guards, and stepped out into the rain once more. The night was darker now, the storm growing stronger. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. Marcello Ferrante walked through the empty streets of Blackstone Harbor, and behind his quiet eyes, plans were forming. Don Salvatore had started something that could destroy everything. Vincent Calabrese was more dangerous than the Don realized, and somewhere between them, invisible to both, the fixer would decide how this war would end. The rain continued to fall, washing away the footprints of the man who controlled the city, the man who kneeled before fools and accepted their contempt, the man whose name was whispered in fear by judges and politicians and crime lords, who would never know that he walked among them in disguise. The wolves were indeed hungry tonight, but they did not know that the shepherd had teeth of his own. The feast was held in the grand ballroom of the Conti mansion, a room that had witnessed 3 generations of celebrations and an equal number of executions. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting prismatic light across tables laden with silver and porcelain. The walls were covered in burgundy silk, and oil paintings of Conti ancestors watched the proceedings with the stern disapproval of men who had killed for less than a sideways glance. Marcello moved through the room like a ghost, a white towel draped over his arm, a silver tray balanced on his palm. He poured wine for men who did not acknowledge his existence. He cleared plates for women who looked through him as if he were made of glass. He attended to the needs of the Conti family's most important allies and associates, and not one of them knew that the servant refilling their glasses was the same man who had decided 6 months ago whether their businesses would survive or burn. This was his punishment for tardiness. This was what Don Salvatore considered appropriate discipline: to take a soldier and reduce him to a servant, to parade him before the family's guests as an example of what happened to those who failed to show proper respect for the Don's time. Marcello accepted it without complaint. He had accepted far worse over the years. The guest list for tonight's feast read like a directory of Blackstone Harbor's criminal aristocracy. There was Anthony Rizzo, who controlled the Longshoremen's Union and took a percentage of every shipment that passed through the harbor. There was Margaret Chen, whose network of illegal gambling operations generated more revenue than most legitimate businesses in the city. There was Father Dominic Castellano, a priest whose church served as a money laundering operation and whose confessional had heard secrets that could bring down half the city's government. And there, seated at Don Salvatore's right hand, in a position of honor that made Enzo Moretti visibly uncomfortable, was a man Marcello had not expected to see tonight, a man whose presence changed everything. Senator William Hartley was 62 years old, a career politician whose carefully cultivated image of integrity had made him one of the most powerful men in the state. His silver hair and patrician features graced campaign posters across the region, and his speeches about law and order had won him the support of voters who believed he represented everything good and decent about American politics. What those voters did not know was that Senator Hartley had been in Don Salvatore's pocket for nearly 20 years. What they did not know was that his campaigns were funded by money that had been washed through a dozen shell companies before reaching his treasury. What they did not know was that his tough stance on organized crime was carefully calibrated to target only those organizations that competed with the Conti family. Marcello knew all of this, of course. He had compiled a dossier on Senator Hartley that was 3 inches thick, containing photographs and recordings and financial documents that would end the man's career in an afternoon. But he had never used this information. Senator Hartley was more valuable as an asset than as a destroyed enemy. A senator who owed his position to the Conti family was a senator who could block investigations, redirect federal resources, and ensure that certain indictments never materialized. But tonight, as Marcello poured wine into the senator's glass and listened to the conversation at the head table, He realized that something had changed. Senator Hartley was not here for the usual reasons. He was not here to receive his quarterly payment or to discuss which investigations needed to be buried. He was here because Don Salvatore had summoned him, and the topic of their conversation made Marcello's blood run cold. "I need your assurance," the Don was saying, his voice low enough that only those at the immediate table could hear, "that when the conflict begins, your people will look the other way. The Moreno family has friends in the Justice Department. I need those friends neutralized." Senator Hartley's face was a mask of practiced calm, but Marcello could see the tension in the way he held his wine glass, the slight tremor in his fingers. "You are asking me to obstruct a federal investigation before it even begins. That is not a small thing, Salvatore." Don Salvatore smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who has cornered his prey. "I am asking you to honor the arrangement we have maintained for 2 decades. Your career exists because of me. Your beautiful house in the suburbs, your children's education, your wife's jewelry collection, all of it exists because I have allowed it to exist. Do not forget who you serve, William." The senator's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "I will do what I can, but I need time to position my people, and I need to know the timeline. When do you intend to move against Calabrese?" "Within the week," Don Salvatore said. "Perhaps sooner. The message has been delivered. Now we wait for his response, and then we strike." Marcello moved away from the table, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil in his mind. Within the week. The Don intended to start a war within the week, and he had already secured political cover for his actions. This was worse than Marcello had anticipated. Don Salvatore was not acting on impulse. He had been planning this for some time, positioning his pieces, ensuring that when the violence began he would be protected from the consequences. But there were things the Don did not know, things that only the fixer knew. Senator Hartley's assurances were worthless. Marcello had learned 3 months ago that the senator was under investigation by a special prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen, who answered to no one, and who had spent the last year building a case that would expose every corrupt deal Hartley had ever made. The senator did not know about this investigation. His contacts in the Justice Department had been carefully fed false information, leading him to believe he was safe. But within 6 months, possibly sooner, William Hartley would be in handcuffs, and every promise he made to Don Salvatore would become ash in the wind. This was information Marcello could use. This was leverage. He continued his circuit of the room, pouring wine, clearing plates, listening. Always listening. The feast was a symphony of conversations, and Marcello was the only one who could hear all the instruments at once. Near the windows, Anthony Rizzo was complaining to Margaret Chen about shipments being delayed at the harbor. Someone was paying off customs officials to slow down inspections, and Rizzo could not figure out who. Marcello knew. He was the one paying the officials. The delays were designed to put pressure on Rizzo, to remind him that his control of the harbor was not as absolute as he believed, to keep him dependent on arrangements that flowed through the fixer's network. In the corner by the fireplace, Father Castellano was speaking in hushed tones with a man Marcello did not immediately recognize. He moved closer, pretending to adjust a candelabra, and caught fragments of their conversation. Something about a shipment from overseas, something about a container that needed to disappear, something about payment in untraceable cryptocurrency. Marcello filed this information away. He would investigate later, and at the center of the room, holding court like the queen of a dark kingdom, Giuliana Conti was entertaining a circle of admirers with a story about her recent trip to Milan. She wore a gown of deep crimson that made her look like a wound against the white tablecloths, and her laughter was sharp and brittle, the laughter of someone who found nothing genuinely amusing. Marcello had studied Giuliana Conti for years. She was the Don's only surviving child, the heir to an empire she had never asked to inherit. Her mother had died when she was 12, officially from a heart condition, unofficially from an overdose of sleeping pills that may or may not have been self-administered. Her brother Marco had been killed in a car accident when Giuliana was 19, an accident that Marcello had quietly confirmed was actually an assassination ordered by a rival family that no longer existed. These tragedies had shaped her into something cold and distant, a woman who trusted no one and loved nothing except perhaps the power that her father's name provided. She had been engaged twice, both times to men from allied families. Both times the engagements had ended abruptly, under circumstances that were never explained. There were rumors about what had happened to those men. Marcello knew the truth. One had attempted to strike her during an argument and had subsequently fallen from a balcony. The other had been discovered selling information to the Moreno family and had disappeared into a concrete foundation somewhere in the industrial district. Giuliana Conti was dangerous. This was something her father understood intellectually, but continuously underestimated in practice. He saw her as a pawn to be married off for political advantage, a vessel for producing heirs, a symbol of family continuity. He did not see the razor blade hidden beneath her silk exterior. Marcello saw it. Marcello saw everything. He was passing near her table when Enzo Moretti's thick hand closed around his arm. "Mouse," the capo said loudly, his voice carrying across the room. "You have been neglecting the Don's table. His glass has been empty for nearly 5 minutes. What kind of servant allows the Don to thirst at his own feast?" The room grew quiet. Conversations trailed off as guests turned to watch the confrontation. This was entertainment for them, a demonstration of hierarchy, a reminder of their own elevated positions. Marcello lowered his eyes. "I apologize. I will attend to the Don immediately." But Enzo did not release his arm. Instead, his grip tightened, his gold rings pressing painfully into Marcello's flesh. "You will do more than apologize. You will kneel and beg the Don's forgiveness for your incompetence. And then you will remain on your knees for the rest of the evening, ready to serve whenever he commands." Marcello felt the weight of every eye in the room. He felt the contempt radiating from the guests, the amusement at his humiliation. He felt his own rage, burning deep in his chest like a coal that had been heating for 20 years. But he said nothing. He did nothing. He simply nodded and allowed Enzo to drag him toward the head table, where Don Salvatore sat watching with an expression of mild interest. "Don Conti," Enzo announced, pushing Marcello forward so roughly that he stumbled and fell to his knees on the marble floor. "Your servant has been neglecting his duties. He has allowed your glass to sit empty while he wandered the room. I have brought him to beg your forgiveness." Don Salvatore looked down at Marcello with eyes that held neither anger nor sympathy, only the cold calculation of a man measuring the utility of those around him. "Is this true, Marcello? Have you neglected your responsibilities?" Marcello pressed his forehead to the cold floor. "Yes, Don Conti. I have no excuse. I beg your forgiveness." The Don was silent for a long moment. Around the room, guests watched and waited, eager to see what punishment would be administered. Senator Hartley looked uncomfortable. Father Castellano was smiling. Giuliana's face was unreadable. Finally, Don Salvatore spoke. "Forgiveness is earned through service, Marcello. You will spend the rest of the evening on your knees beside my chair. You will refill my glass the moment it becomes empty. You will not eat. You will not drink. You will not leave my side until I dismiss you. Is this understood?" "Yes, Don Conti. Thank you for your mercy." Enzo released Marcello's arm with a final shove, and Marcello shuffled on his knees to position himself beside the Don's chair. The feast resumed around him, conversations picking up where they had left off, guests returning to their meals and their intrigues. No one paid any further attention to the man kneeling on the floor. He had served his purpose as entertainment. Now he was furniture again. Marcello remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands folded in his lap. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what they expected: a broken man, a failed soldier, a nobody who had been put in his place. But behind those downcast eyes, Marcello was working. He was close enough to the head table now to hear every word that passed between Don Salvatore and his guests. He heard the Don discussing troop movements with Enzo, planning the initial strikes against Moreno territory. He heard Senator Hartley nervously agreeing to additional requests, each promise another thread in the web that would eventually strangle him. He heard Tommaso the consigliere offering quiet counsel that the Don mostly ignored, warnings about the risks of rapid escalation that fell on deaf ears. And he heard something else, something that made everything clear. The Moreno family is weakened. Don Salvatore was saying to a man Marcello recognized as Roberto Saviano, the Don's chief financial officer. Calabrese has been losing money for months. His gambling operations are failing. His drug supply chains have been disrupted. His allies are questioning his leadership. This is the perfect moment to strike. Marcello knew why the Moreno family was weakened. He had spent the last 8 months systematically undermining their operations. He had arranged for their gambling operations to be raided by police who owed him favors. He had redirected their drug shipments to competitors. He had whispered rumors into the ears of their allies, questioning Calabrese's competence, suggesting that his best days were behind him. He had done this not to help Don Salvatore, but to maintain the balance of power in Blackstone Harbor. The Moreno family had been growing too strong, threatening to upset the equilibrium that allowed the fixer to operate. Marcello had intended to weaken them just enough to keep them in check, not to create an opportunity for the Conti family to destroy them entirely. But Don Salvatore had seen the weakness and drawn exactly the wrong conclusion. He believed that fortune had smiled upon him, that circumstances had aligned to give him the chance he had always wanted. He did not know that the circumstances had been created by the man kneeling beside his chair. This was the danger of invisible power. When you shaped events from the shadows, you could not control how others interpreted those events. You could not prevent fools from seeing opportunity where you had intended only stability. The feast continued for another 3 hours. Marcello remained on his knees, refilling the Don's glass whenever it emptied, enduring the contemptuous glances of guests who passed by his position. His legs went numb, his back ached, but he did not move, did not complain, did not show any sign of the calculations racing through his mind. When the last guests finally departed, and the servants began clearing the tables, Don Salvatore looked down at Marcello as if remembering for the first time that he was there. "You may rise," the Don said. "You have served adequately tonight. Let this be a lesson about the importance of attentiveness." "Thank you, Don Conti," Marcello said, struggling to his feet on legs that had lost all feeling. He stumbled slightly, and Enzo, who was standing nearby, laughed. "Look at him," the capo said. "He can barely walk. Perhaps we should make him crawl home on his hands and knees. It would be fitting for a mouse." "Enough, Enzo," the Don said, though there was no real rebuke in his voice. "Marcello has been punished. Now I need him capable of performing his duties. We have much work ahead of us." Enzo's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "As you say, Don Conti." "Marcello," the Don continued, turning his cold gaze back to his soldier. "Tomorrow you will return to your regular duties. But I want you to understand something. What happened tonight was necessary. In this family we do not tolerate failure, no matter how small. Every man must know his place and fulfill his role perfectly. Do you understand?" "I understand, Don Conti." "Good. Now go. Rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Marcello bowed and walked out of the ballroom on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He passed through the mansion's grand foyer, past the guards who watched him with barely concealed amusement, past the portraits of Conti ancestors who seemed to mock him from their gilded frames. He was almost to the front door when a voice stopped him. "Marcello." He turned. Giuliana Conti stood in the doorway of a side parlor, still wearing her crimson gown, a glass of wine in her hand. Her dark eyes studied him with an intensity that he had rarely seen directed at anyone, least of all himself. "Come here," she said. It was not a request. Marcello hesitated for only a moment before walking toward her. He stopped at a respectful distance, his posture conveying the appropriate deference. "Miss Conti, how may I serve you?" Giuliana did not answer immediately. She took a sip of her wine, never breaking eye contact. Then she stepped closer, close enough that Marcello could smell her perfume, something dark and floral with an undertone of smoke. "You are very interesting," she said quietly. "Do you know why?" "I am just a soldier, Miss Conti. There is nothing interesting about me." "That is exactly what I mean," she said. A smile played at the corners of her lips, though it did not reach her eyes. "You say you are just a soldier. You act like you are just a soldier. But I have been watching you for years, Marcello, and something does not add up. I do not understand, Miss Conti." She leaned even closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Tonight, when Enzo dragged you in front of everyone, When my father humiliated you in front of the most powerful people in the city, your eyes never changed. Everyone else in your position would have shown something. Fear, anger, shame, something. But you showed nothing. Your eyes were completely dead, like you were not even there. Like this was all just a performance. Marcello felt a chill run down his spine. This was dangerous. Giuliana was seeing things that no one else had ever noticed. She was looking beneath the mask. I have learned to accept my place, he said carefully. Emotion serves no purpose when you are powerless. Giuliana laughed softly. Powerless. Yes, that is what everyone believes. That is what my father believes. That is what Enzo believes. But I wonder, Marcello, I wonder what you believe. She stepped back, and the moment of intensity passed. Her face became a mask once more, beautiful and cold and unreadable. Go home, she said. Rest. But know that I am watching you, Marcello Ferrante, and one day I will discover what you are hiding. She turned and walked away, her crimson gown trailing behind her like blood across the marble floor. Marcello stood motionless for a long moment, his mind racing. Then he continued toward the door, stepped out into the night air, and began the long walk home. The rain had stopped while he was inside, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights. Marcello walked for 6 blocks, checking periodically to ensure he was not being followed, before he allowed himself to think about what had just happened. Giuliana knew something. She did not know what exactly, but she sensed that he was not what he appeared to be. This was a complication he had not anticipated. The Don's daughter was intelligent and observant and dangerous, and she had just announced her intention to investigate him. He would need to be more careful. He would need to reinforce his cover, to give Giuliana explanations for anything unusual she might observe. And he would need to consider whether she represented a threat that required a more permanent solution. But not tonight. Tonight, he had other matters to attend to. He reached his apartment building, a nondescript structure in a middle-class neighborhood that matched his apparent income as a low-level soldier. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, unlocked his door, and stepped inside. The apartment was small and modestly furnished, containing nothing that would raise questions if anyone ever searched it. A bed, a dresser, a small television, a kitchen with basic appliances. It was the apartment of a man who had nothing to hide because he had nothing worth hiding. Marcello went to the bedroom closet and moved aside a rack of ordinary clothes to reveal a section of wall that looked exactly like the rest of the closet's interior. He pressed his thumb against a hidden sensor, and a panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage that led to a second apartment that officially did not exist. This was one of his 3 sanctuaries in the city, spaces that appeared on no lease, no utility record, no tax document. They existed in the gaps of Blackstone Harbor's bureaucracy, maintained by bribes and shell companies and the systematic corruption of officials who did not know who they were really working for. The hidden apartment was the opposite of the one he showed to the world. Here, there were banks of monitors connected to surveillance feeds throughout the city. Here there were filing cabinets containing dossiers on every powerful person in Blackstone Harbor. Here, there were 17 different phones, each connected to a different network of contacts and informants. Here, on a secure computer with encryption that would take the NSA decades to crack, was the complete financial architecture of the Fixer's empire. Marcello sat down in front of the monitors and began to work. First, he checked the surveillance feed from Don Salvatore's office. The conversation between the Don and Senator Hartley after the feast had been productive. The senator had agreed to everything, his fear of exposure overwhelming whatever conscience he might once have possessed. Good. The more compromised Hartley became, the more useful his eventual fall would be. Next, Marcello pulled up the files on the Moreno family's current operations. The weakness he had engineered was real, but it was also recoverable. If given time and resources, Calabrese could rebuild. The question was whether Marcello wanted him to rebuild. A war between the Conti and Moreno families would be catastrophic for everyone. It would disrupt trade, attract federal attention, and force the Fixer to choose sides publicly. But it would also create opportunities. Wars produced chaos, and chaos could be exploited by those who knew how to navigate it. Marcello considered his options. He could prevent the war by exposing Don Salvatore's plans to Calabrese, giving the Moreno family time to prepare or negotiate. He could accelerate the war by feeding the Don false intelligence that would lead him into a trap. He could remove the Don entirely, arranging an accident or illness that would create a power vacuum in the Conti family. Each option had advantages and disadvantages. Each would reshape the balance of power in ways that were difficult to predict. But there was another factor to consider now: Giuliana. If Don Salvatore fell, Giuliana would inherit control of the family. She was smart, capable, and far more dangerous than her father realized. Under her leadership, the Conti organization might actually become a threat to the Fixers' network. She might discover things that her father had never thought to look for. On the other hand, she might also be useful. A partnership with someone who understood the value of invisible power, who could serve as a public face while Marcello continued to operate from the shadows, might be exactly what he needed. He would need to learn more about her. He would need to understand her motivations, her loyalties, her weaknesses. He would need to determine whether she was an enemy to be eliminated or an ally to be cultivated. For now, he had more immediate concerns. Marcello picked up one of his phones and dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the third ring by a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. "This is unexpected," the voice said. "You do not usually call at this hour." "Circumstances have changed," Marcello said. "I need information about the Moreno family's response to Don Salvatore's message." "What has Calabrese decided?" There was a pause. "He is meeting with his captains tomorrow morning. The word is that he is considering his options. Some want to fight, others want to negotiate. Calabrese himself has not declared his position. And what is your assessment?" "I believe he will fight," the voice said. "Calabrese is old school. He will see Don Salvatore's ultimatum as an insult that cannot be forgiven. If he backs down, his own people will lose respect for him. He has no choice." Marcello nodded to himself. This matched his own analysis. "Good, keep me informed. If anything changes before the meeting tomorrow, I want to know immediately." "Understood." Marcello ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the monitors that showed him a city sleeping unaware of the storm that was about to break. Don Salvatore wanted a war. Calabrese would give him one, and somewhere in the middle the fixer would decide who emerged victorious. But first, there was the matter of tonight's humiliation. The hours on his knees, the laughter of men like Enzo Moretti, the cold contempt of a Don who saw him as nothing more than a useful servant. Marcello had endured such treatment for 20 years. He had accepted it as the price of invisibility, the cost of maintaining his cover. But tonight something had shifted. Perhaps it was the pain still throbbing in his knees. Perhaps it was the memory of Giuliana's knowing eyes. Perhaps it was simply that after 2 decades of patience, he was finally growing tired. He looked at his hands, ordinary hands that had never held a weapon in anger, hands that had poured wine and cleared plates and accepted abuse without complaint. These hands had destroyed careers, bankrupted businesses, and arranged the deaths of men who never knew who had killed them. These hands controlled more power than Don Salvatore could imagine, and soon those hands would remind the Don and everyone who served him what happened when you humiliated the wrong man. Marcello smiled in the darkness, and it was not a pleasant expression. The wolves were hungry, but they did not know that they were about to become prey. The morning sun rose over Blackstone Harbor like a wound opening in the sky, painting the industrial waterfront in shades of rust and blood. Marcello stood at the window of his hidden apartment, watching the city wake to what would be the first day of its transformation. Somewhere out there, Don Salvatore was preparing for war. Somewhere out there, Vincent Calabrese was deciding how to respond. And here, invisible to both of them, the man who would determine the outcome of their conflict was drinking black coffee and reviewing his plans. The first phase required precision. Marcello had spent the night mapping out every move, every contact, every piece of information that would need to be deployed. The war that Don Salvatore wanted would happen, but it would not happen the way the Don expected. It would happen according to the fixer's design. He made his first call at 7 in the morning to a woman named Detective Maria Santos of the Blackstone Harbor Police Department. Santos was 44 years old, a 20-year veteran of the force who had built a reputation for incorruptibility that was entirely deserved. She was one of the few people in the city who could not be bought, which made her extraordinarily valuable to Marcello. Because while she could not be bought, she could be used. Detective Santos answered on the second ring. Her voice was tired but alert, the voice of someone who had been awake for hours. "This is Santos." "Detective," Marcello said, using the voice he reserved for this particular identity, a voice slightly deeper than his natural tone, with a hint of an accent that suggested Eastern European origins. "This is your friend. I have information you will want." There was a pause. Santos knew better than to ask questions about his identity. They had done business before, and she had learned that the anonymous informant who called from blocked numbers always delivered. "I am listening," she said. "The Moreno family is planning to move a large shipment through the harbor tomorrow night. Container 47B on the vessel Anastasia, registered out of Panama. The contents are worth approximately $15 million to the right buyers. Drugs? Weapons. Military grade. Enough to arm a small army." This was true as far as it went. What Marcello did not tell Santos was that the shipment had been arranged by his own network, sold to the Moreno family through intermediaries who could not be traced back to the fixer. The weapons were real, but they were also bait. When the police seized them, the Moreno family would lose not only $15 million, but also credibility with their suppliers. More importantly, Calabresi would spend the next week trying to figure out who had leaked the information, suspecting everyone in his organization except the true source. "Why are you telling me this?" Santos asked. "What do you get out of it?" "Let us say that I have an interest in seeing certain parties weakened. The details are not your concern. What matters is that the information is accurate. You can verify it through your own sources if you do not trust me." "I will," Santos said. "And if this checks out, I will owe you one." Marcello smiled. "I will remember that, detective." He ended the call and moved on to the next phase. His second call was to a man named Jerome Washington, a mid-level accountant at First Continental Bank, who handled wire transfers for corporate clients. Washington was 51 years old, had 3 children in college, and had been embezzling small amounts from client accounts for the past 6 years to pay for their education. Marcello had discovered this 18 months ago and had been holding the information in reserve for exactly this moment. Jerome answered his office phone with the practiced cheerfulness of a man who spent his days pretending to care about people's money. "First Continental Bank, Jerome Washington speaking. How may I help you today?" "Jerome," Marcello said, his voice flat and cold, "we need to talk about the Miller account, and the Sanderson account, and the 17 other accounts you have been stealing from since your daughter started at Harvard." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Jerome spoke again, his voice had lost all of its professional warmth. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "Who I am does not matter. What matters is that I have documentation of every transfer you have made, every falsified record, every dollar you have stolen. I estimate the total is somewhere around $240,000. That is federal prison territory, Jerome. Your children would graduate before you got out." "What do you want?" Marcello told him. He needed certain transfers flagged for review, certain accounts frozen, certain information shared with certain parties. Nothing that would implicate Jerome directly, nothing that would expose his crimes to his employers. Just small adjustments to the flow of money through the bank, adjustments that would create problems for the Conti family's legitimate business interests. Jerome agreed because he had no choice. Marcello added him to the list of assets that were now in play and moved on. By noon, he had made 14 calls to 14 different people in 14 different positions throughout Blackstone Harbor. A health inspector who would suddenly find violations at 3 Conti-owned restaurants. A union official who would call for unexpected work stoppages at a Conti construction site. A journalist who would receive anonymous documents suggesting impropriety in the Conti family's charitable foundation. A divorce attorney who would contact Don Salvatore's wife with interesting information about certain photographs that had been taken at a hotel in Atlantic City. None of these actions would destroy the Conti family. They were pinpricks, annoyances, distractions. But they would create chaos. They would occupy the Don's attention at exactly the moment when he needed to focus on his war with Calabresi. They would make him feel that the world was turning against him, that enemies were everywhere, that his empire was under assault from all directions. And they would never be traced back to Marcello Ferrante, the humble soldier, the mouse, the man who kneeled on marble floors and poured wine for his betters. At 1 in the afternoon, Marcello left his hidden apartment through a series of passages that connected to the basement of a laundromat 4 blocks away. He emerged onto the street in different clothes than he had worn the night before, his appearance subtly altered by the addition of glasses and a cap that changed the shape of his face. He walked 6 blocks to a coffee shop he had never visited before and would never visit again, sat at a corner table with a view of the entrance, and waited. The man who joined him 10 minutes later was named Father Thomas Brennan. He was 73 years old, a Jesuit priest who had spent his life serving the poor of Blackstone Harbor, a man whose faith was genuine and whose commitment to justice had survived decades of witnessing the worst of human nature. He was also one of Marcello's oldest and most trusted contacts, a relationship that had begun when Marcello was a teenager, and Father Brennan had run the orphanage where he had spent his childhood. The priest sat down across from Marcello with the careful movements of a man whose body was beginning to fail him. His eyes, however, were as sharp as ever, and they studied Marcello with the particular intensity of someone who had known him before he became what he was. "You look tired, my son," Father Brennan said. "When did you last sleep?" "Sleep is a luxury I cannot afford at the moment, Father." "Things are moving quickly." The priest nodded. "I have heard rumors. The Conti family is preparing for war with the Morenos. The streets are full of whispers. The rumors are true. Don Salvatore intends to move against Calabrese within days. When he does, there will be violence. People will die. And what is your role in all of this?" Marcello was silent for a moment. His relationship with Father Brennan was complicated. The priest knew that Marcello operated in the shadows of Blackstone Harbor's criminal world, but he did not know the full extent of that operation. He believed that Marcello was a reluctant participant, a man trapped by circumstances, doing his best to minimize harm while waiting for an opportunity to escape. This was not entirely untrue. It was simply incomplete. "I am trying to prevent the worst outcomes," Marcello said carefully. "There are forces in motion that could tear this city apart. I am working to redirect them." Father Brennan reached across the table and placed his weathered hand on Marcello's. "I have known you since you were a boy, Marcello. I baptized you. I taught you to read. I watched you grow into a man who should have had a different life. I know that what you do because you believe it is necessary. But I worry about your soul. My soul has been lost for a long time, Father." "No soul is ever truly lost," the priest said. "Not while there is still breath in the body. Not while there is still the possibility of redemption." Marcello looked at the old man's face, at the kindness that had survived decades of exposure to cruelty, at the faith that refused to be extinguished, no matter how much darkness surrounded it. He felt something twist in his chest, something that might have been grief for the person he could have been. "I did not ask you here to discuss theology, Father. I need your help." Father Brennan nodded slowly. "I assumed as much. What do you need?" "When the war begins, there will be casualties. Civilians, innocents, people who have nothing to do with the conflict between these families. I need you to be ready. I need the church to open its doors, to provide sanctuary, to care for those who are displaced by the violence. We will do this regardless of whether you ask," the priest said. "It is our duty. I know. But I am asking you to do more than simply react. I'm asking you to reach out to your contacts in other parishes, other faiths, other community organizations. I'm asking you to create a network of safe houses throughout the city, places where people can hide when the streets become dangerous. I am asking you to prepare for the worst." The priest was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching Marcello's face. "You expect it to be that bad? I expect it to be worse than anyone imagines. Don Salvatore is arrogant and reckless. Calabrese is intelligent and vengeful. When they collide, the destruction will not be limited to their organizations. It will spread, it will consume everything it touches." Father Brennan withdrew his hand and sat back in his chair. "Very well. I will do as you ask. But I want something in return." "Name it." "When this is over, when the war has ended, and the city has found its new equilibrium, I want you to consider walking away. I want you to consider leaving this life behind and finding something else. Something that does not require you to manipulate and deceive and operate in darkness. You are not too old to start again, Marcello. You could still become the man you were meant to be." Marcello looked at the priest and felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. It was a kindness, he knew. It was Father Brennan trying to save him the way he had tried to save all the lost children who had passed through his orphanage. But it was also impossible. Marcello had built something in the shadows of Blackstone Harbor, something that could not simply be abandoned. He was the fixer. He was the invisible hand that held the city together. Without him, the delicate balance of power would collapse, and the chaos that followed would be worse than anything Don Salvatore could cause. "I will consider it, Father," he said. It was not a promise, but it was not a lie either. He would consider it. He considered many things. They talked for another 20 minutes, working out the details of the sanctuary network that Father Brennan would create. When they were finished, the priest rose to leave, then paused and looked back at Marcello. "One more thing, my son. Whatever happens in the days to come, remember that you have choices. You are not a puppet, you are not a slave to circumstances. You can always choose to be different. You can always choose to be better." He left without waiting for a response, and Marcello sat alone in the coffee shop, staring at the empty chair across from him. Choices. Father Brennan believed in choices. He believed that every human being had the power to determine their own destiny, to break free from the patterns of the past, to become something new. It was a beautiful belief. It was the kind of belief that allowed a man to spend 70 years serving the poor without losing hope. Marcello did not share this belief. In his experience, choices were illusions. People believed they were making decisions, but they were really just following paths that had been laid out for them by circumstance and character and the accumulated weight of history. Don Salvatore believed he was choosing war, but he was really just acting out the inevitability of his own arrogance. Calabrese believed he was choosing to fight, but he was really just responding to pressures that left him no other option. And Marcello himself, for all his power and all his planning, was simply fulfilling the role that the universe had assigned to him 20 years ago, when he first realized that information was worth more than violence. He finished his coffee and left the shop, disappearing into the afternoon crowds of Blackstone Harbor. The next 3 days were a symphony of controlled chaos. Marcello watched from a distance as his plans unfolded. The health inspector closed 2 of the Conti restaurants, citing violations that would take weeks to remedy. The union work stoppage delayed a construction project that was already running over budget, costing the family hundreds of thousands of dollars. The journalist published an article about the Conti Charitable Foundation that raised questions without making accusations, the kind of story that planted seeds of doubt without providing enough evidence for a lawsuit. And the photographs from Atlantic City found their way to Don Salvatore's wife, a woman named Isabella, who had endured her husband's infidelities for decades because divorce was not an option in their world. She did not confront the Don directly. She was too smart for that. But she began making arrangements of her own, transferring money to accounts he did not know about, reaching out to family members who had been waiting for an opportunity to challenge Salvatore's leadership. The cracks were appearing. Meanwhile, Detective Santos and her team raided the Anastasia and seized the weapons shipment, exactly as Marcello had predicted. The news coverage was extensive, and Calabrese was forced to spend valuable time and resources dealing with the fallout. 3 of his captains were arrested. His suppliers demanded explanations. His allies began to wonder if the Moreno family had a leak. And through it all, Don Salvatore continued to prepare for his war, oblivious to the fact that his enemy was being weakened, not by his own actions, but by the invisible hand of the man who served him wine. On the 4th day, Marcello received a summons. The message came through the usual channels, delivered by a runner who knew only that he was carrying instructions from the Don to a low-level soldier. Marcello read the message in the privacy of his ordinary apartment, the one that existed on leases and utility bills, the one that anyone searching for Marcello Ferrante would find. The Don wanted to see him, tonight, at the mansion. This was unusual. Soldiers like Marcello did not receive personal summons from the Don. They received orders through their capos, filtered through layers of hierarchy that maintained the appropriate distance between power and servitude. For Don Salvatore to summon him directly meant that something had changed. Marcello spent the afternoon considering possibilities. Perhaps the Don had learned something. Perhaps someone had talked or made connections that should not have been made. Perhaps Giuliana had shared her suspicions with her father, and the Don wanted to interrogate his servant personally. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. Perhaps the Don needed Marcello for another mission, another message to be delivered, another task that required discretion and invisibility. There was only one way to find out. Marcello arrived at the Conti mansion at 8 in the evening, dressed in the plain clothes that befitted his station. The guards at the gate searched him thoroughly, more thoroughly than usual, before allowing him to pass. Inside, the mansion was quieter than he had ever seen it. The servants moved through the halls with downcast eyes, and the usual buzz of activity that surrounded the Don's operations was notably absent. He was escorted not to the grand dining room or the ballroom, but to Don Salvatore's private study, a room that Marcello had never entered. The guard who led him knocked once, waited for a response, then opened the door and gestured for Marcello to enter. The study was smaller than Marcello had expected, lined with bookshelves containing volumes that had never been read, decorated with photographs of Don Salvatore with politicians and celebrities and foreign dignitaries. A fire burned in the hearth despite the mild weather, and the Don sat behind a massive desk of dark wood, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes fixed on Marcello with an intensity that was unlike anything Marcello had seen before. But the Don was not alone. Giuliana stood by the window, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. And beside her, leaning against the bookshelf with the casual arrogance that characterized everything he did, was Enzo Moretti. "Close the door," Don Salvatore said. Marcello obeyed, feeling the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on his back. When he turned to face them, he arranged his features into the mask of humble servitude that had protected him for 2 decades. "You summoned me, Don Conti. How may I serve?" The Don did not answer immediately. He studied Marcello the way a scientist might study a specimen under a microscope, looking for something specific, something that would confirm or deny a hypothesis. Finally he spoke. "Marcello, do you know why I have survived in this business for so long? Do you know why the Conti family has prospered while others have fallen? I would not presume to understand the reasons for your success, Don Conti. I will tell you," the Don said. "I have survived because I trust no one. I question everything. I look for patterns that others miss. And right now, Marcello, I am looking at a very interesting pattern." Marcello's heart rate remained steady. His face showed nothing but polite confusion. "A pattern, Don Conti?" Don Salvatore leaned forward. "In the past 4 days, my family has suffered a series of misfortunes. Restaurants closed, construction delayed, questions raised about our charitable work. My wife has become suddenly distant and secretive, and the Moreno family, whom I expected to find weak and vulnerable, has instead been the subject of a major federal raid that has put their operations under intense scrutiny. I was not aware of these developments, Don Conti. I have been attending to my regular duties, have you?" the Don asked. "Because here is what interests me, Marcello. All of these problems began immediately after the feast, immediately after you spent an evening on your knees beside my chair, listening to every conversation I had with my guests." Marcello allowed concern to enter his expression. "Don Conti, surely you do not think that I had anything to do with these events. I am a soldier. I have no connections, no resources, no ability to cause such things to happen." Enzo stepped forward, his face twisted with barely contained aggression. "Do not lie to the Don. We have been watching you. We know you left your apartment at strange hours. We know you made phone calls from locations we could not trace. We know you are hiding something. This was unexpected. They had been surveilling him." Marcello reviewed his movements over the past few days, calculating what they might have seen. He had been careful, but perhaps not careful enough. "I occasionally walk at night when I cannot sleep," Marcello said. "It is a habit from my youth. And the phone calls were to women I have been seeing. I am not proud of it, but I have needs, and I did not think my personal life was relevant to my duties." Giuliana spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "He is lying." All eyes turned to her. "I have been studying him for years," she continued. Every time he speaks, there is a calculation behind his words. Every answer is designed to deflect, to redirect, to hide. He is not what he appears to be, Father. I do not know what he is, but he is not a simple soldier. Don Salvatore nodded slowly. My daughter has always been perceptive. Too perceptive for her own good sometimes. But in this case, I believe she may be right. He rose from his desk and walked around it, approaching Marcello with the slow deliberation of a predator closing in on its prey. I'm going to give you one chance, Marcello. One chance to tell me the truth about who you are and what you are doing. If you lie to me, if you continue to pretend that you are nothing more than a humble servant, I will have Enzo extract the truth from you. And I promise you, that will be an unpleasant experience for everyone involved. Marcello looked into Don Salvatore's eyes and saw nothing but cold certainty. The Don believed he had caught a spy, a traitor, an enemy within his own organization. He was prepared to torture and kill to confirm his suspicions. This was the moment Marcello had always known might come. The moment when his cover was threatened, when his carefully constructed identity was at risk of exposure. He had planned for this moment, had prepared contingencies and escape routes and fallback positions. But as he stood in Don Salvatore's study, surrounded by enemies, he realized that he was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being the mouse, the servant, the man who kneeled and accepted abuse from fools who did not know they were alive only because he allowed them to live. Perhaps it was time to show them what they were really dealing with. Don Conti, Marcello said slowly, you are correct. I have been hiding things from you. I have been deceiving you for many years. But you are also wrong. I am not a spy for your enemies. I am not a traitor selling your secrets. The truth is far more complicated than that. Don Salvatore's eyes narrowed. Then tell me the truth. Marcello took a deep breath. The truth is that I am the reason your family has survived as long as it has. The truth is that every time you faced a threat you did not know about, I eliminated it before it could reach you. The truth is that I have protected you and your organization from destruction more times than you can imagine. The room was silent. Don Salvatore stared at him with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing fury. You expect me to believe that you, a common soldier, have been secretly protecting my family? Yes, Marcello said, because that is exactly what I have done. The question is whether you are intelligent enough to understand what that means, or whether you are going to let your pride destroy everything I have built. It was a gamble, the biggest gamble of Marcello's life, but as he watched the emotions play across Don Salvatore's face, he knew that the game had finally begun, and this time he would not be playing from the shadows. The silence in Don Salvatore's study stretched like a wire pulled to its breaking point. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with photographs of power and prestige. Outside, somewhere in the vast darkness of Blackstone Harbor, the machinery of criminal empire continued to grind, oblivious to the confrontation taking place in this small room. Don Salvatore's face had become a mask of controlled fury. His hands, which had been folded calmly on his desk moments before, now gripped the edge of the wood with whitened knuckles. Beside him, Enzo Moretti's hand had drifted toward the weapon holstered beneath his jacket, his small eyes fixed on Marcello with predatory anticipation. Only Giuliana remained still, watching from the window with an expression that mixed fascination with something that might have been recognition. "You dare," Don Salvatore said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You dare to stand in my study and claim that you have been protecting my family? You, a soldier who has never risen above running errands and delivering messages. You expect me to believe this fantasy?" "I expect nothing, Don Conti," Marcello replied. "I am simply telling you the truth. What you believe is your own affair." Enzo stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "Let me have him, Don. Give me 1 hour, and I will have the real truth out of him. I will make him scream every secret he has ever kept." Marcello turned his gaze to the capo, and something in his eyes made Enzo hesitate. "Do you remember Carlo Benedetto, Enzo? The man who ran the protection rackets in the warehouse district before you took over that territory?" Enzo's brow furrowed. "Benedetto? He died 8 years ago. Heart attack. He died because I arranged for him to die," Marcello said calmly. He had been stealing from the family for years, skimming money from the collections and hiding it in accounts overseas. I discovered this, documented it, and arranged for certain chemicals to be introduced into his medication. His death appeared natural because I needed it to appear natural. A murder investigation would have exposed his theft, and the scandal would have weakened the family at a critical moment. The room went silent again. Don Salvatore's eyes had narrowed to slits. "You are lying," he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that had not been there before. "I am not lying. I can tell you exactly how much Benedetto stole. $473,000 over 6 years. I can tell you the names of the banks where he hid the money. I can tell you that after his death, I arranged for those accounts to be quietly emptied and the funds returned to your family's treasury. Your accountants noticed an unexpected surplus that year. They attributed it to a successful quarter. They were wrong." Don Salvatore was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Tommaso, who had been sitting in the corner of the room, so still and quiet that Marcello had almost forgotten he was there. "Tommaso, is this true? Was there a surplus that year?" The old consigliere's face was pale, his ancient eyes moving between Marcello and the Don with something that looked like fear. "There was, Don Conti. I remember it well. We never understood where it came from." Marcello allowed himself a small nod. "I have protected this family in ways you cannot imagine, Don Conti. Every time an enemy moved against you in secret, I knew about it before they could strike. Every time a traitor within your organization planned to betray you, I eliminated the threat before you ever learned of their disloyalty. I have been the shadow that guards your house while you sleep, the hand that removes obstacles before you even know they exist." "Why?" Don Salvatore demanded. "Why would you do this? What could you possibly gain from protecting a family that treats you like dirt?" "Because the family's survival serves my purposes," Marcello said. "Because stability in Blackstone Harbor benefits my interests. Because as long as the Conti organization exists and operates according to predictable patterns, I can continue to do what I do without interference." "And what exactly is it that you do?" Marcello met the Don's eyes directly, something he had never done before in all his years of service. "I solve problems, Don Conti. I make connections. I know things that no one should know. And I use that knowledge to shape events according to my design. In this city, in the circles where real power operates, I am known by a different name. A name that even you have heard whispered, though you never knew who it belonged to." Juliana stepped forward from the window, her dark eyes burning with intensity. "The Fixer." The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Don Salvatore's face went pale. Enzo's hand fell away from his weapon. Even Tommaso, who had seen everything in his long life, looked shaken. "The Fixer," Don Salvatore repeated slowly. "You are claiming to be the Fixer. I am not claiming anything. I am telling you who I am." The Don let out a laugh, but it was a hollow sound, devoid of genuine amusement. "The Fixer is a legend, a myth, a story that criminals tell each other to explain events they do not understand." "Then how do you explain the things I have just told you?" Marcello asked. "How do you explain Carlo Benedetto? How do you explain the 100 other interventions I have made on your family's behalf that you never knew about? How do you explain the fact that for 20 years, every major threat to your organization has been neutralized before it could strike?" Don Salvatore was silent, his mind clearly racing behind those cold, calculating eyes. Juliana spoke again. "Father, I believe him." All eyes turned to her. "I have been watching him for years," she continued. "I knew there was something wrong about him, something that did not fit. A soldier who never sought promotion. A man who accepted humiliation without anger. Eyes that showed nothing, no matter what was done to him. I thought he might be a spy, a plant from a rival family. But this makes more sense. He hid in plain sight because no one ever suspects the servant. No one ever imagines that the man pouring wine might be the most powerful person in the room." Don Salvatore's face hardened. "Even if what you say is true, even if you are this legendary fixer, that does not explain why you have come forward now. What has changed?" Marcello took a breath. "What has changed is that you are about to destroy everything I have built. Your war with Calabrese will tear this city apart. It will bring federal attention that neither of us can afford. It will destabilize the network of arrangements and agreements that keep Blackstone Harbor functioning. I have spent 20 years creating a balance of power that benefits everyone who operates within it. You are about to overturn that balance because of your pride. The Don's face flushed with anger. My pride? You think this is about pride? I think you see weakness in the Moreno family and you want to exploit it. I think you believe that you can expand your territory and increase your power without understanding the consequences. I think you are making a mistake that will destroy your family and everything it has built. Don Salvatore slammed his hand on the desk. I am the Don of this family. I decide what is a mistake and what is an opportunity. I do not need advice from a servant who thinks he is more important than he is. Marcello did not flinch. You need my advice more than you know, Don Conti. The weakness you see in the Moreno family exists because I created it. I have spent the last 8 months systematically undermining Calabrese's operations, disrupting his supply chains, poisoning his relationships with allies. I did this to maintain the balance, to keep him from becoming too powerful. I did not do it to give you an opening for war. You created the weakness? Don Salvatore's voice was dangerous now, a low growl that promised violence. Yes, and I can reverse it. I can make one phone call and restore everything I have taken from Calabrese. I can tell him exactly who has been sabotaging his operations and why. I can give him the ammunition he needs to destroy you instead. The question is whether you are intelligent enough to recognize that we should be working together, or whether you are going to force me to become your enemy. The room exploded into chaos. Enzo lunged forward, drawing his weapon, his face contorted with rage. 2 guards who had been standing by the door rushed in, drawn by the commotion. Don Salvatore was shouting orders, demanding that Marcello be seized, that he be taken to the basement where interrogations were conducted. But before anyone could touch him, Marcello spoke a single sentence. If I do not make a phone call within the next 30 minutes, everything I know about this family will be delivered to the FBI. Everyone froze. Marcello stood perfectly still in the center of the room, surrounded by men with weapons, his face as calm as if he were discussing the weather. I have prepared for this moment, he continued. Contingencies, safeguards, if anything happens to me, if I am killed or imprisoned, or prevented from making my regular check-ins, a package will be delivered to federal investigators containing enough evidence to put everyone in this room in prison for the rest of their lives. Documents, recordings, photographs, financial records, everything. Don Salvatore's face had gone grey. You are bluffing. Am I? Marcello asked. Are you willing to bet your freedom, your family's future, on the possibility that I am bluffing? Because if you are wrong, if I am telling the truth, then everything you have built ends tonight. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Don Salvatore raised his hand and the guard stepped back. Enzo, still holding his weapon, looked at the Don with disbelief. Don Conti, we cannot let him threaten us like this. We cannot show weakness. Silence, Enzo, the Don commanded. He was staring at Marcello with an expression that mixed hatred with something that might have been respect. You have played a dangerous game, Fixer. Coming here, revealing yourself, making threats. What do you want? I want the same thing I have always wanted, Marcello said. Stability, order. A city where power is balanced and predictable, where business can be conducted without constant warfare, where everyone benefits from cooperation rather than suffering from conflict. I want you to abandon your plans for war with Calabrese, and if I refuse, then I will take steps to protect my interests. I will not destroy your family unless you force me to, Don Conti. You have been useful to me, and I would prefer to continue our arrangement, but I will not allow you to burn down the city I have spent my life building. Don Salvatore was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk, his mind clearly calculating options and outcomes. Finally he spoke. You say you want stability. You say you have been protecting this family for 20 years. Assuming I believe you, assuming I accept that you are who you claim to be, why should I trust you now? Why should I believe that you have my interests at heart rather than your own? I have never claimed to have your interests at heart, Marcello replied. I have my own interests and they happen to align with yours. I benefit from your family's stability. I benefit from the absence of war. I benefit from predictability and order. As long as those conditions exist, I have no reason to act against you. The moment you threaten those conditions, we become enemies." Don Salvatore laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You are the most arrogant man I have ever met. You stand here, surrounded by my men in the heart of my home, and you speak to me as if you were the one in power. With respect, Don Conti, I am the one in power. I have always been the one in power. The difference is that now you know it." Giuliana stepped forward again, positioning herself between her father and Marcello. "Father, may I speak with him alone?" Don Salvatore looked at his daughter with surprise. "You want to be alone with this man who has just threatened our entire family." "I want to understand him," Giuliana said. "I want to know what he truly wants, beyond the speeches and the threats, and I think he might speak more freely without an audience." The Don considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. You have 15 minutes, but he does not leave this room and guards will remain outside the door. If you feel threatened at any moment, call out and they will kill him regardless of his safeguards." Giuliana nodded. "Thank you, Father." Don Salvatore rose from his desk and walked toward the door, pausing beside Marcello. "This conversation is not over, Fixer. You have revealed yourself, which means you have given up your greatest advantage. I do not know yet how I will use this information, but I will use it. Remember that." He left the room, followed by Enzo and Tommaso and the guards. The door closed behind them, and Marcello was alone with Giuliana Conti. She walked to her father's desk and poured herself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. She did not offer one to Marcello. She sat down in her father's chair, crossing her legs, and studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met," she said, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Marcello replied. "Why did you reveal yourself? You could have continued operating from the shadows indefinitely. You could have found other ways to stop my father's war. Instead, you walked into this room and announced your identity to the most dangerous people in the city. Why?" Marcello was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "Because I am tired," he said finally. "Tired of hiding. Tired of watching fools make decisions that affect millions of lives without understanding the consequences. Tired of being invisible." Giuliana raised an eyebrow. "That is surprisingly honest. You asked a direct question. You deserve a direct answer." She took a sip of her whiskey. "My father will never accept what you have told him tonight. Even if he believes you, even if he recognizes the truth of what you are, his pride will not allow him to submit to someone he has spent years treating as a servant. He will look for ways to destroy you. He will seek to regain the upper hand, I know, and yet you came anyway. I came because the alternative was worse. Your father's war would have destroyed everything. Thousands of people would have died. Federal investigators would have descended on Blackstone Harbor and dismantled every organization operating here. The network I have spent my life building would have been scattered to the winds. I could not allow that." Giuliana leaned forward. "What if there were another way?" Marcello met her eyes. "What are you proposing?" "My father is old," she said quietly. "His judgment has been declining for years. He surrounds himself with men like Enzo, who tell him what he wants to hear rather than what he needs to know. He makes decisions based on pride and tradition rather than strategy and intelligence. He is leading this family toward destruction. You are suggesting that I help you remove him. I am suggesting that we help each other. You have power that I do not have. Knowledge, connections, the ability to shape events from the shadows. I have something you do not have. Legitimacy, the right of succession, the loyalty of men who will follow a Conti, even if they would not follow a mysterious figure known only by reputation." Marcello considered this carefully. "You are proposing a partnership. I am proposing an alliance, my father removed from power, me installed as the head of this family. You continuing to operate as you always have, but with a partner who understands your value rather than an obstacle who threatens your work. And what would you want in return? Information, guidance. The benefit of your expertise as I rebuild this family into something more intelligent and more sustainable than what my father has created. And eventually, when the time is right, I would want to know everything, every secret, every connection, every lever of power that you control. Marcello was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the city continued its endless churning, oblivious to the bargain being negotiated in this small room. "You understand that what you are proposing is patricide," he said finally. Juliana's face did not change. "I understand that I am proposing survival. My father is going to destroy this family. If I do not act, I will be destroyed along with it. I have no intention of dying for his pride." Marcello looked at her, at the cold determination in her eyes, at the steel beneath the silk. He had underestimated her. They had all underestimated her. She was not just the Don's daughter, a pawn to be married off for political advantage. She was a predator, patient and intelligent, waiting for her moment to strike. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "there would need to be conditions." "Name them." "Your father is removed from power but not killed. I do not kill unnecessarily, and his death would create complications. He is retired, sent somewhere comfortable but distant, where he cannot interfere." Juliana considered this. Acceptable. Enzo Moretti is removed entirely. He is too loyal to your father and too stupid to be trusted. He disappears. A smile flickered across Juliana's face. "That will be a pleasure to arrange. The war with Calabrese is abandoned. I will repair the damage I have done to the Moreno family, and you will negotiate a new truce, one that benefits both organizations and maintains the balance of power." Agreed. And finally, Marcello said, "You will never attempt to expose my identity or my network. You will work with me as a partner, not as a rival. If I ever discover that you are moving against me, I will destroy you without hesitation." Juliana rose from the chair and walked toward him, stopping close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same dark floral scent he remembered from the night of the feast. "I would expect nothing less," she said. "Do we have an agreement?" Marcello looked into her eyes and saw his own reflection staring back at him. A predator, recognizing another predator. Two wolves deciding to hunt together rather than tear each other apart. "We have an agreement," he said. Juliana extended her hand, and Marcello took it. Her grip was firm, her skin cool and smooth. They shook once, sealing a bargain that would reshape the future of Blackstone Harbor. "Then we should begin planning," Juliana said. "My father will be expecting me to report on our conversation. I will tell him that you are delusional, a man suffering from grandiose fantasies, not worth the trouble of interrogation. That will buy us time. How long? A few days at most. He will be focused on his war preparations. He will want to believe that the threat you represent has been dismissed, but eventually he will return to the matter. We need to move before then." Marcello nodded. "I will make the necessary arrangements. When the moment comes, you will need to be ready to act." "I have been ready for years," Juliana said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. "I have been waiting for someone like you to come along, someone who could see what I am, someone who could help me become what I was meant to be." She turned and walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "One more thing, Fixer. When this is done, when my father is gone and I am in control, I want you to tell me your real name. Not Marcello Ferrante, not the Fixer, your real name, the one you were born with." Marcello was silent for a moment. "Why?" "Because we are partners now," Juliana said, "and partners should know each other's secrets." She opened the door and walked out, leaving Marcello alone in Don Salvatore's study, surrounded by photographs of power and prestige, watching the fire slowly die in the hearth. He stood there for a long time, thinking about what he had done, what he had set in motion. For 20 years he had operated from the shadows, unseen and unknown, shaping events according to his design. Now he had stepped into the light. He had revealed himself. He had made an alliance with a woman who was as dangerous as anyone he had ever known. Everything was about to change. The wolves were no longer circling each other in darkness. They had found common ground. They had identified common prey. And soon, very soon, the hunt would begin. The coup began on a Wednesday, 3 days after Marcello's confrontation with Don Salvatore, on a night when the moon hung low over Blackstone Harbor, like a blind eye watching events it could not prevent. Marcello had spent those 3 days in careful preparation. He had activated assets throughout the city, positioning pieces on a chessboard that only he could see. He had arranged for certain loyalties to shift, certain information to flow, certain obstacles to be removed before they could interfere with the plan. And he had waited with the patience of a man who had spent 20 years waiting for this moment, for the signal that would set everything in motion. The signal came at 11 in the evening, a single text message to one of his burner phones. 2 words. It begins. Juliana had done her part. She had spent the past 3 days playing the role of dutiful daughter, dismissing Marcello's claims to her father as the fantasies of a delusional soldier, assuring him that the threat had been neutralized. Don Salvatore, eager to believe that his plans for war could proceed without interference, had accepted her report with relief. He had returned his attention to preparations for the assault on Moreno territory, scheduled to begin at midnight. He did not know that midnight would never come. Not for him. Marcello moved through the shadows of the city like a ghost, making his way toward the Conti mansion through a route he had mapped years ago, a path that avoided every camera, every patrol, every potential witness. He carried no weapon. He had never needed weapons. His power lay in knowledge, in connections, in the ability to arrange events so that others did his killing for him. Tonight, others would do a great deal of killing. The first phase of the operation targeted Enzo Moretti. The capo had been summoned to a warehouse in the industrial district, ostensibly to oversee the loading of weapons that would be used in the assault on Moreno territory. What he did not know was that the men waiting for him at the warehouse were not loyal to Don Salvatore. They were loyal to Juliana. Men she had cultivated for years, soldiers who understood that the future of the family lay with the daughter rather than the father. Enzo arrived at the warehouse at 10:45, accompanied by 2 bodyguards who had been with him for a decade. He walked through the door with the arrogant confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the hierarchy, who had never imagined that the power he wielded could be stripped away in an instant. The bodyguards died first, shot from behind by men they had trusted. Enzo barely had time to turn before he was surrounded, disarmed, forced to his knees on the concrete floor of the warehouse where he had overseen so many interrogations, where he had inflicted so much pain on others. Juliana emerged from the shadows, wearing a black dress that seemed to absorb the dim light, her face as cold and beautiful as a statue carved from ice. "Hello, Enzo," she said. "Do you remember all the times you laughed at the mouse? All the times you humiliated him in front of the family? All the times you thought you were demonstrating your power by tormenting a man who could not fight back?" Enzo's face was pale with terror, but his voice still carried the bravado of a man who could not accept what was happening. "You cannot do this. Your father will destroy you. You are signing your own death warrant." "My father," Juliana said, "will be in no position to destroy anyone. By tomorrow morning he will be gone, and I will be the head of this family. You, unfortunately, will not live to see it." She nodded to the men surrounding Enzo, and they dragged him toward a door at the back of the warehouse, a door that led to a room where no screams could be heard, where no evidence would remain. Juliana watched him go with an expression of profound satisfaction. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, where a car was waiting to take her to the mansion for the final phase of the operation. "One down," she said to no one in particular, "one to go." At the mansion, Don Salvatore was holding court in his study, surrounded by the captains and lieutenants who would lead the assault on Moreno territory. Maps were spread across his desk, marked with routes and targets and fallback positions. The men were tense with anticipation, eager to begin the violence that would expand the family's power and cement their places in the new order. None of them knew that the new order would not include them. Marcello entered the mansion through a servant's entrance, using a key he had obtained years ago. Moving through corridors he knew better than the guards who patrolled them. He passed through the kitchen, where the night staff was preparing food for the soldiers who would be leaving soon for battle. He climbed the back stairs to the second floor, where the family's private quarters were located, and he stopped outside a door that led to a room where Isabella Conti, the Don's wife, was waiting for him. Isabella was 60 years old, a woman who had once been beautiful, and who still carried herself with the dignity of someone who had been raised to believe in her own importance. Her face was lined with decades of disappointment and silent rage, and her eyes held the cold determination of someone who had finally decided to act after years of passive suffering. She opened the door before Marcello could knock, as if she had been counting the seconds until his arrival. "Is it time?" she asked. "It is time," Marcello confirmed. "Is everything prepared?" Isabella nodded and stepped aside to let him enter. The room was a sitting area connected to her bedroom, furnished with antiques that had been in her family for generations. On a table by the window sat a silver tea service, 2 cups already poured, steam rising from the dark liquid. "He always takes tea before a major operation," Isabella said. "He says it calms his nerves. He will come here in approximately 15 minutes, as he always does, expecting me to wish him success in his endeavors. He has no idea that I have been wishing for his failure for 30 years. Marcello looked at the teacups, understanding what they contained. "You are certain about this?" Isabella's smile was bitter. "He killed my lover when I was 25 years old. Did you know that? A young man from a good family, someone I had known since childhood. We were planning to run away together, to escape this life. Salvatore found out and had him murdered. He made me watch. He told me that if I ever tried to leave him again, he would do the same to my children. I have been his prisoner ever since." Marcello nodded slowly. The fixer knew many secrets, but this was one that had not been in his files. Perhaps some secrets were too personal, too painful, to leave traces that could be discovered. "What happens now?" Isabella asked. "Now you wait. When your husband comes for his tea, you will serve him as you always have. You will be the dutiful wife he expects. And when the tea takes effect, you will leave through the passage I have arranged and disappear. A car will take you to the airport. A plane will take you to a country with no extradition treaty. Money has been arranged. A new identity has been prepared. You will never have to see this city or this family again." Isabella's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice remained steady. "And Juliana? What happens to my daughter? Your daughter will take control of the family. She will lead it in a new direction, one that serves everyone's interests better than her father's path would have. She is stronger than you know, Mrs. Conti. She will survive. She will thrive." Isabella was silent for a moment, processing this information. Then she nodded. "I always knew she was different. I always knew she had something cold inside her, something that came from her father. I tried to love her, but she was never really mine. She was always his, even when she hated him." "She will need that coldness in the days ahead," Marcello said. "The family will need a strong leader. Juliana will provide that." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "One more thing, Mrs. Conti. When you reach your destination, when you have settled into your new life, there is someone who will contact you, a priest named Father Thomas Brennan. He will offer you whatever support you need as you begin again." Isabella's eyes widened. "You know Father Brennan?" "He baptized me," Marcello said quietly. "A long time ago, in a different life. He is a good man. He will help you find peace if peace is something you still want." He left the room before she could respond, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion, moving toward his final position for the night's events. The rest of the operation unfolded with the precision of a symphony conducted by a master. At 11:30, Don Salvatore left his war council and climbed the stairs to his wife's sitting room, expecting the ritual cup of tea that had preceded every major operation for as long as he could remember. He found Isabella waiting for him, composed and dignified as always, the tea poured and ready. They spoke briefly, exchanging the empty words of a marriage that had been dead for decades. The Don drank his tea in 3 long swallows, impatient to return to his preparations. He kissed his wife on the forehead, a gesture of possession rather than affection, and turned to leave. He made it halfway to the door before his legs gave out. Isabella watched him fall with an expression of profound calm. She watched him struggle to rise, his limbs refusing to obey his commands, his voice emerging as a strangled whisper. She walked past his prone form without looking down and left the room through a hidden passage that Marcello had shown her, disappearing into the night. Don Salvatore lay on the floor of his wife's sitting room, paralyzed but conscious, his mind racing with the terrible understanding of what had happened. He could not move. He could not speak. He could only wait, helpless as a child, for whatever came next. What came next was Juliana. She entered the room 10 minutes later, still wearing the black dress from the warehouse, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. She stood over her father's prone form and looked down at him with an expression that mixed contempt with something that might have been satisfaction. "Hello, father," she said. "Are you comfortable? The paralysis is temporary, in case you were wondering. You will regain movement within a few hours. By then, everything will be different." She knelt beside him, bringing her face close to his, close enough that he could see the cold determination in her eyes. "You always underestimated me," she continued. "You saw me as a pawn, a bargaining chip, a womb to produce heirs for whatever family you decided to marry me into. You never understood that I was watching, learning, waiting. You never understood that I was more like you than you knew." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that would soon be hers. "Enzo is dead," she said casually. "Your war council has been disbanded. The captains who were loyal to you have been given a choice: accept my leadership or join Enzo. Most of them chose wisely. The few who did not are being dealt with as we speak. By morning, the Conti family will have new leadership. My leadership." She turned back to face her father. "And the war with Calabresi? It is over before it began. The fixer has already contacted him, explained the situation, proposed a new arrangement that benefits everyone. Calabresi was surprisingly receptive. It seems he never wanted war either. He was simply responding to your aggression." Don Salvatore's eyes burned with impotent fury, but he could not move, could not speak, could not do anything but listen. "I know what you are thinking," Juliana said. "You are thinking that I will pay for this, that your loyal soldiers will rise up against me, that this coup will fail and I will suffer the consequences of my treachery. But you are wrong. Your loyal soldiers are dead or converted. Your allies have been informed that a change in leadership has occurred and that existing agreements will be honored. The police have been paid to look the other way, as they always have. And the fixer, father, the fixer is my partner now. The man you humiliated, the man you forced to kneel on the floor like a dog. He is the most powerful person in this city, and he is on my side." She walked to the door and paused, looking back at her father one last time. "You will be taken to a facility upstate," she said. "A private place, comfortable but secure. You will live out the rest of your days there, far from this city, far from this family, far from anyone who might help you reclaim what you have lost. It is more mercy than you deserve. But I am told that killing you would create complications. So you will live, father. You will live with the knowledge that everything you built now belongs to me." She left the room, closing the door behind her, leaving Don Salvatore alone with his paralysis and his rage and the growing understanding that his empire had been stolen from him by the daughter he had never respected and the servant he had never noticed. The night continued, and the transfer of power proceeded according to plan. Marcello watched it all from the shadows, directing the operation through a network of communications that would be destroyed before dawn. He watched as Juliana addressed the surviving captains, accepting their pledges of loyalty with the regal bearing of a queen ascending to her throne. He watched as Don Salvatore was loaded into an unmarked vehicle and driven away to begin his exile. He watched as the pieces of a new order fell into place, each one positioned exactly where he had intended. And when it was over, when the night's work was complete, he met Juliana in the garden behind the mansion, in a gazebo surrounded by roses that had been planted by her mother decades ago. "It is done," she said. "The family is mine." Marcello nodded. "You did well tonight. Your father never suspected." Juliana smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "He never saw me as a threat. That was his greatest weakness. He could not imagine that a woman, his own daughter, could outmaneuver him." "Many men share that weakness," Marcello said. "It makes them vulnerable." Juliana turned to face him directly. "And what about you, Fixer? Do you see me as a threat?" Marcello considered the question carefully. "I see you as a partner. A dangerous partner, certainly, but a valuable one. As long as our interests remain aligned, I have no reason to see you as anything else. And if our interests diverge, then we will deal with that situation when it arises. For now we have work to do. The transition must be completed. The arrangement with Calabresi must be formalized. The family's operations must continue without interruption. Juliana nodded. You promised to tell me your real name, the one you were born with. I did promise that. Then tell me. Marcello was silent for a long moment, looking out at the roses, at the city beyond the garden walls, at the future that was finally taking shape after 20 years of preparation. My name is Marco, he said finally. Marco Conti. Juliana's face went pale. Conti, I am your brother, Marco said quietly. The brother who supposedly died in a car accident when you were 19 years old. The brother your father tried to have killed because I discovered what he truly was and threatened to expose him. Juliana stared at him, her composure shattered for the first time. But Marco died. I saw the body. I attended the funeral. You saw a body that had been prepared to look like me. You attended a funeral for a fiction. I survived the attack your father ordered barely, and I spent months recovering in secret. When I emerged, I was someone else. I had a new face, a new name, a new identity. I became Marcello Ferrante, a common soldier with no connections and no past. And I began building the network that would eventually allow me to destroy the man who tried to murder his own son. Juliana was trembling now, tears streaming down her face. All these years you were here, you were watching me, you let me think my brother was dead. I had no choice, Marco said. If your father had known I survived, he would have tried again. He would have killed anyone connected to me. You, mother, anyone. The only way to protect you was to disappear completely, to become invisible. And the humiliation? The years of abuse from Enzo, from father. You endured all of that because of me? I endured it because it served my purpose. Every humiliation was a reminder of what I was working toward. Every indignity strengthened my resolve. And now, finally, it is over. Our father is gone. His cruelty is ended. And you and I are free. Juliana stepped forward and embraced him, pressing her face against his chest, her body shaking with sobs that she had held inside for years. Marco held her, his arms wrapping around the sister he had watched from a distance for 2 decades, the family he had protected from the shadows. They stood like that for a long time, 2 survivors of a house built on blood and lies, finally reunited in the ruins of their father's empire. When Juliana finally pulled away, her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were clear. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild, Marco said. You lead the family publicly. I continue to operate from the shadows, maintaining the balance of power that keeps this city stable. Together, we transform the Conti organization into something better than what our father created. Something more intelligent, more sustainable, less cruel. And if people discover the truth, if they learn that the fixer is a Conti, they will not discover it. As far as the world knows, Marcello Ferrante is a soldier who disappeared after the transition of power, one of many casualties of a night that saw significant changes in the family's leadership. Marco Conti remains dead, a ghost from the past. Only you know the truth, only you know who I really am. Juliana nodded slowly. I will keep your secret, brother, for as long as I live. And I will keep yours, Marco replied. We are partners now, family, the only family either of us has left. The sun was beginning to rise over Blackstone Harbor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, washing away the darkness of the night. In the garden of the Conti mansion, 2 predators stood together, looking out at a city that belonged to them, at a future they would build on the ashes of their father's cruelty. The fixer had emerged from the shadows, the mouse had revealed himself as a wolf, and the woman who had been dismissed as a pawn had proven herself to be a queen. Blackstone Harbor would remember this night for generations, the night when power shifted, the night when old debts were paid, the night when the man everyone had humiliated showed them what he truly was. And in the years that followed, when criminals and politicians and judges whispered the name of the fixer, they would never know that he had been among them all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting with infinite patience for the moment when the wolves would finally understand that they had never been the hunters. They had always been the prey. The city awakened to a new day, and somewhere in its shadows Marco Conti watched over his sister's empire, the invisible guardian, the architect of order, the man who had turned humiliation into power and patience into victory. The story of the fixer was far from over, but this chapter at least had reached its end, and it ended exactly as he had always planned.